Hello, I'm flutist Lindsey Goodman, and welcome to A New World, a unique event 8 months in the making. This performance is one wholly crafted, conceived, and executed within the unique parameters of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is unlike any presentation I have ever shared. Since March, 3 composers have generously written new works for me, and as a new music specialist, these pieces have filled part of the vacuum left from the evaporation of in-person performing. Each of these unique miniatures lend a different artistic perspective and have distinctive musical inspirations drawn from life during the year 2020. This is music which speaks directly from creators to us as we all navigate the same socially distant new normal. In considering how best to share these brand new works with you, I wanted to give these composers a luxury uncommon since Beethoven's time: the opportunity of both a world premiere performance and a second hearing of a piece in the same sitting. As we spend this hour together experiencing new music, you'll first hear each piece performed to intake this unfamiliar music with fresh ears. Then, learn more about the composer and his process through a one-on-one interview. And finally, hear the work again, this time accompanied either by the musical score or by composer-chosen companion images to deepen your relationship with this music. This is a true project of the remarkable world circumstances of our time, connecting a performer and 3 composers from around the country with you through the power of technology, proving that there is still music to be made and that we are all closer today because we share a global experience. This is a new world. It's my pleasure to welcome conductor and composer Grant Cooper. Welcome, Grant.
Great to be here, Lindsay.
Thank you. So, as a conductor, how does your insider knowledge of the works of the Western art music canon throughout history inspire you to be a composer?
It's daunting. We're dealing with some pretty amazing musical minds in the canon that we deal with. Every piece that we do is interesting in some way, shape, or form. I've got to admit to you that I've never had a composition lesson in my life, unless you count all my exposure to the scores of people like Beethoven and Mozart and Stravinsky and so forth. And I think as a conductor, one of the things one is most concerned about, especially in a large-scale work, is the structure, the form, the architecture of a given piece of music. And as decades rolled by of my studying scores of vast architecture, some of the longest scores of Mahler, for example, and Bruckner, I really came to value good structure. So that was the first thing that I got from the great masters, was that a understanding of and good use of form was going to be at the basis of a successful piece. And then the other thing that I learned was that many of the great composers deliberately confined themselves to rather short musical ideas. And Beethoven is a perfect example of this. He seemed to eschew the obviously superficially beautiful aspect of, say, a nice melody or something, and boil his ideas down to very short statements that could then be subject to this German idea of development. And from him and other composers, I started to realize that I really valued being able to use a small amount of material. I'm a miser, a musical miser. I use a small amount of material to generate the entire piece. And it's kind of like a mathematical proof, and you may know that I studied mathematics as an undergraduate, that a mathematical proof that takes 5 pages is not as valued as one that takes 5 lines. So a mathematician, nerdy mathematician, would much rather see a 5-line proof and see, oh, that's so elegant, so beautiful. And so I've applied that same thing to music too. The less material that I have, how can I explore the ideas that are implicit in that and apply them? And it's been a wonderful process of discovery.
That's fantastic. And of course, that explains a lot about why the piece that is being featured today is a nice, tight miniature. So in your compositional output, you've composed for a variety of instrumentations, full orchestra, obviously, and solo works like this one, and a variety of settings as well, from works that are meant for children to works that are meant for the concert stage. So how did those sorts of experiences inform your process when you start a new piece?
I find it daunting to start a new piece, and probably like anything, getting started is the hardest thing. My own little way of getting started, though, that I almost always apply, is the realization that I'm not going to start writing at the beginning. So the first thing that I write is really the first note of a piece. And in fact, I've come to realize that more important than anything is understanding where you're going on a piece. So the destination is important. And I often tell the story that it's like planning a vacation. The first thing that you do is decide where you want to go for your vacation. The last thing you do is set the alarm clock for when you're going to get up the morning of leaving for the vacation, right? Which is the first note of a piece. So if I know where I'm going in a piece, then I decide how I'm going to get there, and then I'm going to explore the journey on the way, and only at the very end do I have the introduction. So that's important. Secondly, the audience itself is important. And in my pieces for young audiences, for example, I've consciously tried to involve the audience, the children, in interactive ways with the music, so that there are musical stimuli that they hear and they respond to, so that they're active during the course of listening. Sometimes, like in Rumpelstiltskin's Straw into Gold, it gets pretty noisy in the concert hall. But I've developed over time ways to control that energy and not allow it to simply stop stop the music. Spinning straw into gold has a motion with the hands, which actually is designed so that people don't clap along. Not that clapping along is a problem. It's a great thing that people want to clap and move to the music, but it stops the progress of the narration of the piece. So, in other words, everything that I do is really based on just physical experience in the field, writing for children, modifying what I've written, seeing what works, coming back and trying it again. And I've been lucky in that regard, that I've had opportunities to do multiple performances of my works for children and modify them ever so slightly between each performance in order to better bring out the interactive element of composition.
That's really great, especially the way you talk about thinking about the audience. I personally think it's very important that any musical experience is a triune one between the composer and the performer and the audience, and without any of those things being considered, you don't have a full musical experience. So that's really great and resonates with me a lot. Your piece today is an etude, though, and we musicians most generally think of etudes as technically challenging exercises meant primarily for students. So what specifically inspired you to write this piece, and how does it differ from those more traditional etudes that musicians are used to?
Well, obviously you're asking the question because it's hard to discern what the technical challenge of this particular piece is, and you're right. This is actually an etude for the composer, not for the player. So what I did was I set myself a musical goal, which I wanted to solve by writing this piece. So it's, my goal had always been, Lindsey, to think about a way to make Other Voices, the piece I wrote for you in 2 movements, into a 3-movement piece. Because I could imagine that there would be a first movement that would somehow take us logically to what is currently the first movement into the finale. And so because of the pandemic, I had time on my hands, and I thought, well, this is the chance for me to experiment with this. And the material that I was using as the basis of the etude for you actually originated in my using the musical spelling of the name of a doctor at the hospital in Elmira here, whom our daughter Rachel really admired and was moving on to another role in administration, away so much from being a doctor and more of an administrator. And she wanted me to write a piece based on his name. And I did that for solo violin. The interesting thing about this is that piece had no currency in the repertoire. There was no one really to play it. It was just sitting there on a piece of paper framed as a gift to this doctor. And we still haven't given the gift to the doctor even yet because of the pandemic. We haven't been able to hold the celebratory luncheon or whatever they were going to have where this was going to be presented. So here I was as a composer, like all composers, sitting on a piece that I knew was never going to be played. How could I find some way to perhaps make it fit into this piece, Other Voices? So I set myself that as an etude. And it brings back something that we were talking about earlier too, in terms of the method of composition. I think all of us who compose, without even trying, obviously reflect our musical background. And one of the things that was very important to me early in my musical career as a professional trumpet player was playing in brass quintets, who played a lot of Renaissance music. And I made a study during my master's of instrumental music of the Renaissance, and in particular ornamentation. So I became a nerd on a musicological scale of 1 to 10. I was a 9 probably, in terms of figuring out when a trill was appropriate and when a trill was inappropriate, because there was a certain time in the passage of music history when those kind of ornaments came into fashion. It would be a mistake, for example, to play trills in a madrigal by Gesualdo. You might hear la da 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 da, that trill-like thing, but not da 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 da. You wouldn't hear that. So I became very interested in that, and I realized that in the course of my improvising ornaments within the appropriate style of the time, that I tended to write music that would have these little core units that we were talking about, both Beethovenian type chord things, and then I would decorate them or improvise around them, because that was the background of my own musical upbringing. So we are what we eat. As musicians, we are what we consume as musicians too. So and this is very true of the etude for you too, that there is variation or ornamentation within the development of the two ideas that form the piece.
Indeed, there is. And now that everyone has heard about this, I can't wait for them to hear it when they listen to it once more. So you also mentioned a couple times during this conversation the impact that the pandemic has had. So I'm interested, what sort of part has composition played in your life during these pandemic times?
Well, initially it was a gift. Suddenly we had all of this time and we could concentrate on doing projects that we'd put aside because of being so busy. And I did write some music, including this etude, towards the beginning of that time. And I wish I could report to you that I had this moral fortitude to stick with it. It was surprising to me how I noticed on a daily basis that this urge to create was going away because I wasn't creating for anyone. And it made me realize just how important live performance is and how important it is for our audiences too, that we share this music in the same space. And unfortunately, we're doing the best we can right now using technology to create a delivery system for music. But as all musicians know, and I think most of our audience members know too, there is nothing like a live performance. And I could say too that I've been rather spoiled in my musical life, because I've typically, when I've written a piece, it's been for something and it's been performed. I don't have very many notes written down that haven't been played for an audience somewhere. And so this particular piece, just sitting unplayed over these many months, it hasn't become real for me yet. And I think that's one of the reasons why I haven't felt like writing more pieces that aren't real. They're not real until they're played. And music really isn't music until it's in the air and people have actually heard it either. So, yeah, I'm just a poor soul of lost soul waiting for the times to come back when we can meet with our public and share our music with them and bring joy and hope to the world.
I feel so similarly to that, and obviously the struggle you discuss is really familiar to all musicians. I hope that our audience understands it and feels that loss as well, and that hopefully that feelings like that are the ones that urge us all to communal action to be safe and move past this time sooner so we can get back to those fantastic experiences of live music making together. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this, Grant, and thank you especially for writing your etude in the form of a sonatina movement. I hope that everyone enjoys hearing it one more time.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to introduce composer and educator Matthew Kennedy. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, thank you so much.
So when our pandemic first began affecting our lives in this country back in March, you had the most remarkable and unique musical response to this world crisis. Can you describe what first happened for you when the pandemic hit the United States?
Sure. Well, like a lot of educators, especially those that teach at the college level, uh, we were having a lot of interesting meetings around the beginning of March, the middle of March, to figure out how things were going to change and adapt. For my university, we were about to go on spring break, so we decided to take another week after spring break off. So we were going to have at least a couple of weeks. Also, I'm a father, so my children were also taking school off, so there was a lot of things that were up in the air. Very anxious about how everything was going to move, as a lot of people are and were definitely back then. So I decided to fill that time with something, so I wouldn't be just rambling around. I could actually be productive in some way. So I decided to write some small sketches or characters for my friends in the form of miniatures. So about 30 seconds worth of music, this little piece of music that they could take away and prepare on their own. That process of preparation is such a big thing for us musicians, that we're always working on new reps. So it was something that could be nice and new to fill that time or to fill that process up. Originally, I had it planned to have 15 for that time, and upon the post that I put up on social media for it, it filled up very quickly and moved on to 50 individuals in total, which was above and beyond what I had in mind. I capped it there because I was unsure of how much I could actually do out of those 50, above and beyond that.
That is so inspiring that so many people responded just through social media to your call to create music as a community. So that was the start of your Miniatures for One project. Where did it go from there?
Well, a small publishing company based out of Michigan called Just a Theory Press reached out to me shortly after I was starting the process because they were seeing it catching up on social media and really picking up steam. They were interested in being a part of it and finding some way about getting these pieces out to people. One of our initial conversations was about we didn't want to make any profit off of these pieces. We wanted everything to go to the people who were most in need at that time, because there were so many of us in this community that were in need. So the first thing that came to mind was to make all of the proceeds, all of the costs, 100% of the costs, go to charity. And so at that time, New Music USA was doing their New Music Solidarity Fund campaign to help out a lot of musicians. And that was where we decided to donate all of the proceeds for book one. So we had online spaces to purchase the book either digitally or do pre-sale of the full copy of the book, the print copy. And we moved on from there. We realized quickly that there were going to be more people interested in this. So now that I had the publisher backing, we had sort of a model, we decided, okay, well, let's see what the next group might look like. And we ended up calling it Book 2, this time planning for it to have 50 in it, to have 51 through 100. That came and went throughout the beginning of the summer, and then Book 3. And then finally, somehow we make it to Labor Day, or just before Labor Day, and I'm finishing up miniature number 200 from Book 4, which just is still a bit to take in. It's a large collection of works. Anybody who's ever played music or written music knows that a collection of 50 is already quite a task. There's only a few of those, but a collection of 200 is really something that's quite rare. Even at this size, it's an interesting project to look back upon now.
That's truly amazing. And what's really incredible is that through this project, you were able to connect with musicians from all across the world. So what's the final tally, not only on the number of miniatures, but also the number of countries or the number of states from which all of your collaborating musicians hail?
Sure, that was one of the things that I didn't really think about off at the very beginning, and then it started accumulating more and more performers and these individuals that I really admire and have done so much in their careers that it started to pile up. In total, there are 200 miniatures, as I mentioned, written for 202 performers that are performing on over 50 instruments. So it's the whole orchestra, the whole choir, the whole wind ensemble, a lot of pieces. In terms of geography, because it was a big part of the cover art for the books, it ended up being performers on 5 different continents, from 13 different countries and 33 states, which was really incredible because we were all stuck in this space, a little less so now, but even more so then, that it felt so great to connect to all of these places all over the world whenever we knew that was the one thing we really couldn't do. So it was really a pleasure to see that come about through all of this crazy thing.
It was truly uplifting to see, especially referencing those covers, to see the hearts connecting all the different places to which your music went. It's truly wonderful that so many of the profits of your publishing of these miniatures for one books are going to nonprofits. I really appreciate you bringing to my attention the Loveland Foundation specifically. So the miniature you wrote for me is in the book that benefits that, and this performance actually is sharing the proceeds with the Loveland Foundation as well. So can you tell us more about what made you choose that specific nonprofit and why it's special to you?
This idea of working with organizations like the Loveland Foundation, who are geared towards mental health projects, especially therapy for young girls and women of color, seemed to be something that was at the consciousness of our society at that time, of finding some way of being helpful in the midst of trauma. And that was something that was really near and dear to me. So I saw them online, and I thought, okay, this is the next organization. Out of all of them, at that time I was unsure how many of these there would be, so I actually thought at that time that would be the last one. But I was so happy after that we were able to think even further about some other individuals that could be having that could benefit from this project. So book 3 went to the Trevor Project, and book 4 went to the Matthew Shepard Project, both organizations that are really near and dear to my heart. But I really feel proud about the Loveland Foundation and being a part of that, because it's such a great new organization doing such specific and important work that's really, really important to me as a colleague and also as a father of 2 young girls, to understand how powerful that can be and how transformational that process can really be.
Absolutely. I feel the same. I have leaned heavily on therapy myself during this time, and especially anything we can do to help our Black sisters is really important. So before we wrap up, what have you learned from writing 200 miniatures that you're going to carry forward into other compositional projects in your future?
It's an interesting idea because I'm still processing it all. I think we're all really processing the last 9-10 months at this point. But the biggest takeaway actually has to do with that geographic idea, that the artwork for the whole series is based on connecting in a lot of different ways whenever we really feel isolated. Because I know for a lot of individuals, that isolation can really bring on some anxiety. So the biggest takeaway that I had was during times of celebration or in times of need, we really rely on our network, however that might be. So it edifies us whenever we're on the peaks, and it keeps us moving through those valleys whenever sometimes we want to slow down and set up shop. So this project and this whole year has taught me to just trust that process, trust my network, and feel confident and boldly making my own path whenever a path isn't immediately visible.
I love that answer, and I am honored to be part of your community and part of your network.
Well,
Thank you for sharing all of this, Matt, and most of all, thank you for writing your miniatures for one.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to introduce Tom Beal, who can best be described as a Renaissance man. As an award-winning children's book author, professional musician, and poet, what interested you in the world of composition, Tom?
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Lindsay. Composition, I got into that, and particularly this piece, because I'm thinking about the past few years, which have been very trying for all of us, really. Particularly this current year that we're in has been terrible. And a lot of artists have done really heartfelt and meaningful, profound work about people's struggles and life and death and political statements. And I just felt like there needed to be something also with joy and fun in it. So I've written this piece that encompasses joy and fun. And I was thinking, when I drive back and forth to work, I listen to the Met Opera broadcast. And when I listen to the ones from the 40s, I think of what terrible things were going on in Europe at that time. And yet the Met plays on. Of course they're not now, which is a different tragedy. But I wanted to write a fun piece. Lots of people are doing the other. And I wanted to I wanted to do something fun and for you specifically. So that means it had to be a composition of music, which is why I wrote a composition of music. And I wrote that, my handwriting is really terrible, and I sent that to Lindsay, and it's pretty illegible. So I had a good friend in the West Virginia Symphony, Luke Zyla, transcribe it for us, put it on form that was readable, and I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you, Luke.
Yes, thank you, Luke, and thank you, Tom, for writing something so joyous and fun for me. I think that during these pandemic times, we could all use a little more joy. You and your wife have traveled extensively all around the world. You've seen so many unique and beautiful sights. What inspired you specifically about Slovakia to write this piece?
Well, that started about 10 years ago. I saw an article in the Charleston newspaper about Banska Bystrica, which is a sister city of Charleston. And it looked very intriguing as a medieval town square. So I thought, well, maybe I could take the West Virginia Youth Symphony there on a concert tour. So I contacted the person in Banska Bystrica that's in charge of sister city relations, Zuzana Kucherova. We became good friends through the years and arranged to take the youth orchestra there with her and talk to her, and she was very excited about it. So we arranged a tour that was Budapest, Banska Bystrica, Krakow in Poland, and then Vienna. So Slovakia was kind of unknown territory, of course. I was a little uncomfortable about taking the youth orchestra there without knowing very much about it. So what I did is I organized well, first of all, one does not just fly into central Slovakia. So to see central Slovakia, what I did was organize a hiking trip with Ellen and our friends Jim and Mary McJunkin. And we hiked in stages from Budapest through central Slovakia up to Krakow, stopping in Banska Bystrica along the way. And we fell in love with the country. It was just a beautiful country, beautiful people. And taking the youth orchestra there now twice, great trips. They homestayed with the kids there and had a great time, learned a lot. And then again, Ellen and I went back just a few years ago to see Zuzana's newborn son. So we've been there several times and just love the country. It's a beautiful country.
And you can tell what fondness you have for the country from your music, with its real fondness for that place. Along those lines, your piece features both a fixed media soundtrack and a solo flute line. And what we hear as a homage to Slovakia is these Slovakian folk tunes in addition to extended techniques. So could you describe your process in creating both the electronic and the acoustic aspects of the piece?
Sure. The electronic part stems from our first hiking, actually south of Banska Bystrica, where Ellen and I were hiking around a mountain. And the mountains there are like West Virginia, but they're higher and not as steep. So we were hiking through the forest on a mountain, and we kept hearing this sound, which seemed like it might be music, but then it didn't seem like it's music. Seemed to coalesce into kind of maybe a melody, maybe a rhythm. And it was very far away, but as we kept hiking, it got louder and louder. And finally, we came around the corner of a shoulder of the mountain and saw across to a far shoulder that there was a pasture with hundreds of sheep in it. And we realized at that point that the sound we were hearing was the bells of these sheep. Very high bells, very low bells, and the low bells in particular were coalescing into rhythms that made it sound like music. And then our hike took us on to that, right up to that pasture, where I took a 1-minute video. So the electronic part of this piece is from the audio part of that video. And when you hear it, you hear that the lower bells do coalesce into rhythms, often a 4-note rhythm from what I hear. It's not precise, of course, because it's just coalescing. And then below that, there's an undulating bawing of the sheep, which sounds a little bit like a gasoline motor. But it's actually the bawing of the sheep undulating. And then on top of that, there's the high bells just clanging and clanging with a kind of occasionally a melodic feel to it. But usually it's just the clanging. Anyway, so I took this and the first 30 seconds and the last 30 seconds of the piece are that soundtrack just as it is, but with fading in and fading out. And then the middle 3 minutes, I've layered up to 5 times the recording, starting in different places and with different fades and with different volumes, which gives more complexity to it and also to the sonic effect and also to the rhythmic effect. And in the piece, I don't try to mimic all the complicated rhythms. I keep the piece much more simple rhythms, but playful with the rhythms coming from the sheet. So that's where the electronic part comes from. it was one of those really magical moments when you hear this, you don't know what it is, but it's really intriguing, and then you come around the corner and you see what it is, and it was just a really memorable moment for us. The flute part is pretty much I guess a tone poem, or maybe tone stanza, given it's only 4 minutes long. And it's basically a Slovakian flutist, and it's you, so I'll use the term she, who is walking through the forest, and she's just come back from the border town of Vienna, so she's kind of thinking classical. So she's playing a simple classical melody to start. She hears the sheep bells, knows exactly what they are because she's from Slovakia, and it makes her happy to hear this. And so she starts into actually a polka, which is in a Slovakian style, I hope. That's the intent anyway. And then she takes this polka and plays around with it, and plays around with it in a lot of different ways, and adds into it a descending motif, which is, I feel, is a extended sigh, very happy sigh. And that comes the second time, and it goes right into a very happy part where this sextuplets pattern crossing with the going up, crossing with the descending pattern and 16ths coming down. And that leads us right into actually authentic Slovakian folk tune, which there's a setting of, which I feel is a nice, comfortable, pretty setting of that folk song. Then she plays around with the polka some more, back into the folk song, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah, and then that takes us into back into actually the classical beginning, but this time it goes through a flutter trill into the Slovak national anthem. And this setting is full of trills, and I don't think even the Slovakians would recognize it until probably the second phrase. But then back into some more of the polka, and then it ends back with the Slovakian folk song, this time in a more reminiscent setting, and still happy. But as the bells fade out, I think you really feel their absence, and hopefully that space is filled with memory and not, thank God, the bells are quiet. So, and then the piece ends with actually one more clap of the bell from the flute, which gets into the extended techniques, or technique at least. There's one technique where Lindsey will cluck and slap the keys of the flute at the same time on the same pitch, and that gives a percussive effect and a hollow effect similar to the bells. So she's playing with the bells there, and after that she always says heya, which is she's calling to the sheep as she's hearing the shepherds calling to the sheep in the distance.
I love that the sheep have inspired this music. That makes me really happy as an animal lover. I am very grateful to those sheep.
But I don't want to give the misimpression about sheep in Slovakia. There are a lot of places in the world where there's sheep just everywhere, as you know, in Ireland and parts of Scotland. There are sheep in Slovakia, but it's not like it's a sheep-filled country.
So you came across them by a lovely, happy accident.
That's exactly right, yes.
So to accompany the second hearing of your piece, you've actually crafted a video so that we have some visuals to listen to Slovakia. What sorts of things can we expect to see?
Well, the slideshow is photographs I took mostly on our hikes, or on our hikes through Slovakia, and of the youth orchestra's visit, both of them, to Banská Bystrica. So Slovakia is actually a highly varied country with pastures, farmland, mountains, and all of that. But of course I didn't go everywhere. So the slideshow is from our hiking. So it starts in the south, in the lower mountains, and that's where the sheep are. And when we get to that, there are 3 slides of the sheep. The first 2 are obvious. The third one I put out of order accidentally. It should have been first. But you'll see, if you look closely, way down on the left, that's the first time we saw the sheep. So you actually get a clue to it because you'll see sheep, and then the one with the sheep in the lower. So then after that, we get into Banská Bystrica itself, and you see how pretty the town is. You see some shots of the youth orchestra. And then we end up in the Tatras, north of Banská Bystrica. We're hiking in the lower Tatras and looking across to to the higher tantras, which are much more rugged.
It sounds beautiful. I'm sure that everyone can't wait to hear your beautiful piece again, along with these stunning visuals, knowing a bit more about your compositional process. Thank you so very much for sharing all of this, Tom. And most importantly, thank you so much for writing Slovakia.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I hope that you've enjoyed hearing the world premieres of these 3 brand new works. and deep diving into them with the composers and me. Many thanks to Grant, to Matt, and to Tom for their exciting new music and for sharing their thoughts with all of us. This project has been a labor of love, and it means so much to share it with all of you. The thing I continue to miss most during this time is our physical presence together, sharing live music. But the impetus for this unique project is thanks to the pandemic crucible. For this aspect of our new world, I am truly grateful. If you have enjoyed this journey of new musical discovery, please share a suggested ticket price donation of $15 via PayPal to ljgflute@gmail.com or via Venmo at Lindsey J. Goodman 1. In the spirit of Matt Kennedy's Miniatures for One project, donations received will be split with the Loveland Therapy Fund, which provides financial assistance for Black women and girls nationally seeking therapy and counseling. Connect with me at lindseygoodman.com, and thank you for listening and watching. Until we're all together again, be well.